John Murray. I'm the chairman of the board of directors of the Iona Institute. And I was delighted when Archbishop Martin accepted our invitation to give a talk on the teaching of the Church on marriage. Archbishop Martin is no stranger to Iona. He gave a talk on marriage again back in 2011. I was thinking back to it. I thought it was only a couple of years ago, but it just shows you how you can lose track of time. That was on marriage and the common good. The topic of marriage, of course, continues to be particularly important for various different reasons. And Archbishop Martin is particularly, I think, particularly expert to be able to talk to us about this topic. Two things are kind of new since his talk in 2011. One is the Synod on the Family, and His Grace was a participant in the Synod back in the autumn and will be so again next autumn. And I look forward very much, as I'm sure you do, to hearing what he has to say about the Synod of Bishops. It was very interesting what happened last autumn, and there are various things going on in preparation for the next part. And just shows how important the topic of marriage and family is in the Church, worldwide and globally. It's also an important topic for us in Ireland, particularly at the moment, facing into a referendum, where it is proposed to radically redefine marriage and the family. And I'm sure that Archbishop Martin will have some things to say about that. Particularly of interest is whether the teaching of the Church has any relevance to this referendum. And I think looking at Pope Francis and the picture of Pope Francis here and his statement, you can see where we're going with that. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing his talk. There will be a short period of questions and answers after the talk as well. So we have some time for you to have a chance to ask questions on the talk. I don't need to say very much else about Archbishop Martin because he's so well known to you, but he has been very, very much involved in the past in the Council, the Pontifical Council on the Family, and in very important negotiations and talks at the UN level on the family. So he's well aware of how it is a very important topic and also a very contested topic. So it certainly isn't something that would be done. So, would you like to have him, please, Archbishop Martin?
I'm rather frightened when I hear that I gave a talk here a few years ago. I hope I'm not going to give the same talk this evening. It sometimes can happen. And 3 years is a particularly worrying one because, as you know, the liturgical cycle is every 3 years, and when you start to work on a sermon and you're tired, you can always look back to 3 years earlier. And I'm very grateful to the Iona Institute for this invitation to come and speak here on the theme of the teaching of the Church on marriage today. I thank the director, Mr. David Quinn, and I thank the chair of this evening's session, Dr. John Murray. I come as a Roman Catholic bishop to speak about the Church's teaching on marriage, but also on the place of marriage, which is a natural institution in fostering stability in any society, not just in Ireland. The theme of marriage and the family is at the heart of reflection, as John Murray said, in the Church worldwide, in the light of this synodal reflection that Pope Francis has launched. This reflection involves also a discussion about marriage and the family in every Catholic diocese across the world. And the interest that's being shown in this discussion process is for me an indication of how people consider a strong culture of marriage and the family as vital in society in any part of the world, because marriage and the family deeply matter to all. It's interesting that both Pope John Paul and Pope Francis took the family as the theme of their first synod. Pope John Paul in 1980, Pope Francis now in the last year. Because both these popes had been diocesan bishops up to the moment of their election in two very different cultures. One in a country which was still under communist persecution, and the other in the challenging and changing religious reality of Latin America. Yet both saw very clearly, each from his own perspective, firstly, how Christian marriage and the family are vital for the transmission of the faith, and secondly, how marriage and the family as human institutions are vital for the stability of society. Both saw the need not just to defend the teaching of the Church, but to foster a broad social understanding of the role of marriage and the family, and to present that understanding in an attractive and appealing way in the real situations of today's changing world. Where marriage and the family are not strong, society is weaker. Where societies weaken in times of conflict or political repression or in times of economic strain, it's families who maintain stability and rebuild society and its values. Marriage and the family remain independent of political ideologies, and they keep basic values alive in society. You could see that, for example, in the long years of persecution in communist countries. The faith and fundamental values were maintained in the family. Political and ideological regimes come and go. Marriage and the family are permanent elements in maintaining social stability. Marriage and the family matter. On the occasion of the extraordinary synod last year, Pope Francis surprised many by asking that the preparatory document that had been drawn up be accompanied by a questionnaire, and asking that this questionnaire would be studied not just by bishops, but by as wide a representation of men and women as possible. It was a revolutionary challenge. It never happened before, and I think, I even know, that some bishops had to read the instructions a few times before they realized exactly what they were being asked to do. Then there's another reaction, which is a typically Irish reaction. We immediately found faults with the questionnaire. There were too many questions, the language was too complex, the amount of time available was too short. A great excuse for doing nothing. People ask, how can we carry out such a consultation? We are in Ireland are very good at finding faults and criticisms. And indeed, much of the wider discussion on marriage and the family that takes place in Ireland can be very polemical and critical. Now, there are many reasons to be concerned, many reasons to be critical. A wide range of statistics shows that the family as an institution is undergoing profound changes, that many people have a variety of views about the family, and that many individual families are in crisis. The result of the consultation that took place in advance of last year's extraordinary synod showed that there is a division within the Church. There's a gap between the Church's teaching and what the experience of many in today's world is. And the same divisions emerged also during the synod itself. Many bishops spoke about an increase in cohabitation, purely civil marriage among Catholics. And many other bishops were surprised, at times scandalized, that some seemed to take this change as something to be recognized and not simply condemned outright. And many bishops were surprised when Pope Francis unequivocally asked at the beginning of the synod that the discussion should be open and frank. He told the story that a cardinal, after an earlier meeting, had written to him and said that some of the bishops were afraid to say what they thought because the Pope might not like it. And he said, everyone should say all that they feel they need to say, without polite deference, without hesitation, and at the same time all should listen with humility and welcome with an open heart what others say. There was open discussion. Some of the media then talked about a synod of confusion, and indeed such sentiments were, if anything, fueled by a number of bishops, even cardinals themselves, bishops who were at the synod and bishops who were not at the synod, but perhaps thought they were, who seemed to think that Pope Francis was simply allowing a situation to emerge in which the teaching of the Church was being undermined, and that the synod was on a path towards changing central teachings of the Church. What's common in much of this skepticism and pessimism is that its proponents simply ignored the words of Pope Francis himself in his concluding address to the Synod. Pope Francis believes that truly honest and open discussion is good. He said, "Many commentators or people who talk have imagined that they see a disputatious church, where one part is against the other, doubting," he said, "even the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, the true promoter and guarantor of unity and harmony in the Church. Holy Spirit, who throughout history has always guided the bark of Peter through her ministers, even when the sea was rough and choppy, and when the ministers were unfaithful and sinners. Then he said, personally, I would have been very worried and saddened if there hadn't been these animated discussions, this movement of the spirits, as St. Ignatius calls it, if all were in a state of agreement or silent in a false and quietist peace. He said, instead, I have seen and I have heard with joy and appreciation speeches and interventions full of faith, of pastoral and doctrinal zeal, of wisdom, frankness, and of courage. However, these negative views continue even today. I was reminded of that the other day when I received a letter with the copy of a letter the writer had written to the Apostolic Nuncio. Now, usually such attached letters, if they're sent to me, contain criticism of my theology, criticism of something I said, which they wish dutifully to denounce to the Apostolic Nuncio. On this occasion it was different. The Apostolic Nuncio was being petitioned to take to task none other than Pope Francis. Pope Francis believes that truly honest and open discussion is good, and this seems to unnerve some. The Synod's analysis was very realistic. The perfect family rarely exists. All over the world, families struggle. Families struggle due to poverty, unemployment, marginalization. Many parts of the world, indeed here in our own country, families are struck by wide-scale emigration and the separation that this entails. The perfect family rarely exists, but we should never forget that in the midst of great challenges, great families exist and struggle and contribute to building up and sustaining society. With over 190 bishops from so many countries, it was inevitable that concerns would be different. The challenges which the Church faces in supporting families are different in different parts of the world. I was a member where the bishops are divided into discussion groups for 3 in English. In my English language discussion group, there were 5 Africans, 7 Asians, 1 from Papua New Guinea, and just 2 from what you might call traditional Western countries, myself and the Archbishop of New York. So it was a very, very varied discussion, and you realize the challenges that are faced by the family around the world. An interesting aside was that the bishop from Greece said to me, I have so many Irish weddings that take place on my islands. He said there are weddings arranged by marriage planners as a sort of business, within which the faith dimension is reduced simply to some sort of a colourful ceremony. And it reminds us that fancy weddings may make headlines in glossy magazines, but more often that they reveal only a very superficial notion of what marriage and family are. We need to do much more to ensure that people enter marriage in a mature way. The strong message of the Synod was a call for a radical renewal of the Church's pastoral support for marriage and the family, and for support of the role of marriage and the family in society. In the pluralism which exists today in every part of the world, we need a radical catechesis on marriage and the family. Remember that marriage preparation isn't just preparation for a wedding day or for a wedding ceremony. The tone which Pope Francis wished to give the Synod was never condemnatory. The Church must encounter families where they are. The church must listen to where God is speaking, also through the witness of those Christian married couples who struggle and who fail and who begin again and who fail again. The tone was one of reaching out pastorally and reflecting the mercy of Jesus. Pope Francis constantly stresses an image of the church as a field hospital on the scene of battle. It's a theme from St. Ignatius. A field hospital on a scene of battle where people are taken up into the caring arms of someone, where their wounds are washed and cleansed and they receive a welcome of care and concern. And one of the bishops in the discussion, taking up Pope Francis' image of the church as a field hospital where wounds are healed, he said, sadly, too often the church today appears more like the city morgue, where all the pathologies of things that have gone wrong with the family are examined without emotion. That's something we have to keep in mind in the way we reflect and talk about the future of the family. We should be very realistic in our examination of the reality of the institution of marriage and the family in society, but not get bogged down with all the problems. We have to bring a message of hope and encouragement and support to families. Among the discussions at the Synod was that of men and women with same-sex orientation. During the Synod's discussion as how to reach out to men and women of same-sex orientation, it was clearly and unanimously stressed by all that there is a radical difference between marriage between a man and a woman and the union of two people of the same sex. Yet it was stressed again and again that the church has to reach out and welcome people as they are. The church has to reach out and welcome men and women with same-sex attraction where they are. For many, it's hard to understand how Pope Francis can be opposed to same-sex marriage and yet ask, who am I to judge? But let me come back for a moment to the church's role in fostering marriage. The sacrament of marriage is not just a blessing for a man and a woman on their wedding day. The sacrament of marriage is a sacrament given for the building up of the church. Christian married couples have a calling and a special charism within the church, which would make them active protagonists in fostering the values of love and life, of permanence and fruitfulness, which are the essentials of marriage life. But the fostering and defence of marriage and the family in society is also a primary task for married couples themselves. And married couples should be more and more in the lead in family politics, nationally and locally. The church must reach out to encounter families where they are. But that does not mean that you simply leave people where they are. The church speaks of a law of gradualness, a phrase that was used by the Synod in 1980. That doesn't mean that anything goes. It means that we can be led, by the help of grace, to move step by step towards living our Christian vocation more fully. I've spoken about the Synod and about the teaching of the church, but marriage is not just a theological reality. There are many in Ireland who might say that they find my reflection on the Synod as interesting, but my reflections are really an internal matter for Catholic believers of the Catholic Church. Ireland, they'll say, is a pluralist society. While there's freedom for believers to reflect on and discuss openly their theological views, these views are today only marginally relevant to Irish society, where marriage is looked on differently. What we have to remember is there's only one marriage. There's only marriage as a basic human reality. Catholics may see this basic human reality through the lens of theology, and the marriage ceremony they adopt will reflect that. But what is being talked about always is the one and the same human reality. The Church supports marriage as a human institution, just as the state should. Indeed, there's a sense in which the level of policy that a government gives to the institution of marriage and the family is the real barometer of the seriousness of its social policy. A social policy which doesn't support marriage and the family will only weaken society. What is then the position of the Catholic Church in Ireland about the current discussions on the revisions of some fundamental aspects of family law and even of the Constitution? And what is the role of church leaders in speaking on the subject? And what is the role of Christians in speaking on the subject? Is there a role in this discussion for a contribution which springs from religious faith? Now, it's often said that church leaders have every right to make statements, but that they should limit themselves to the religious sphere. I'm told that no one is challenging my view on religious marriage, but that changes are taking place which deal with what others want, but they won't affect my view on marriage. Does this mean that views which emerge from a Christian tradition are considered out of date, inappropriate for the discussion on issues of public concern? What is the relevance in the debate on social issues? What is the relevance of faith in a pluralist society? Thinking back to the last Sunday's Gospel where we encountered Nicodemus, should we as Christians return to a Nicodemus style of existence and keep our insights of faith within our own hearts alone and present ourselves in public only by night? We should never forget that so much of what is cherished as good in secular society is in fact the fruit of Christian culture. Christian culture has its contribution to make to society. Bishops regularly speak out on social issues, and their comments are often, if not always, welcomed. But fundamentally, the message of God, the message of a God of love, is anything but irrelevant in today's harsh world. One of the problems is that, in many ways, the Church has often in the past presented what is a message of love in a language that is harsh. The truth about Jesus Christ can only be proclaimed in love. That's a challenge in today's culture, where often there's a clash of viewpoints, and where we find it difficult at times to bring the message of our faith into a culture where faith is almost alien. The fundamental question for me on marriage and the family in today's society concerns the nature of the relationship between male and female. For me, that relationship is not simply a social construct, but it's something which is constitutive of human relations. What does it mean to be male and female? Yes, of course, there are some social constructs around the roles of men and women which have evolved in our societies, which do not reflect a true understanding of men and women, and these must be changed. But the male-female relationship is not just social construct. There is something irreplaceable in that relationship between a man and a woman who commit to each other in love, who remain open to the transmission and the nurturing of human life within an intergenerational framework, which altogether this contributes to the stability of society. It's also true that no person exists who is not the fruit of a male and a female. Even if it were possible to clone a child, that child would still bear the genetic imprint of a male and a female. Genetic parentage is not irrelevant. Some people, sadly, have to spend their entire lives seeking their genetic parents, not just out of a natural emotional desire, because knowledge of one's genetic makeup is important. Indeed, it can be vital, for example, when planning to have children. We are all children of a male and a female, and this must have relevance to our understanding of the way children should be nurtured and educated. Genetic makeup is a fundamental dimension also of the intergenerational reality of the family. But it's important at the same time to stress that all children, whatever the circumstances of their birth, should be loved unconditionally and treated with the same rights and the same dignity. This also applies to rights within the Church. Pope Francis has spoken very strongly against priests who might refuse baptism of a child simply because of the particular conjugal relationship of their parents or guardians. Something he said very strongly as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, something he has repeated. Now people will say to me, "You're not married. You've no right to pontificate on a theme about which you have no experience or understanding." How do I respond? The first thing I say is that a bishop does not have a right to pontificate in debates around public social policy. But that doesn't mean that I cannot participate through rational argument or through some basic insights which spring from my belief. Former President Macalis rightly challenged bishops regarding our lack of experience in changing nappies. But our ignorance of the realities of marriage goes way beyond ignorance of changing nappies. I have to be honest, and I have to say that I am lacking in experiential knowledge of the more fundamental realities of the sexual, marital, and parental experiences of a family. And I have to be honest in saying that. Why then would someone turn to me as a priest and ask advice on marriage? Why then would somebody turn to me and ask advice on matters concerning a whole world of life experiences which I do not have? People turn to a priest because he should have gospel wisdom which transcends his own abilities. Gospel wisdom. That answer is a challenging one and a humbling one, because I know how imperfect my faith witness is. I know that gospel wisdom is not something that can be discovered simply through reading books of abstract theology or regurgitating time-old formulae. The gospel wisdom in my ministry can only come when I have an understanding of the truth that I can find in a God who is love and who is merciful. And any language that I use must always reflect that understanding of God. It's not up to me to condemn on my terms. It's up to me somehow or other always to reflect God's love in my style of life. And I know my inadequacies there. There's another problem of language. That is, the church tends to talk in the abstract, to talk about abstract doctrines and theories and norms. Whereas in today's society, much of the discourse begins with the situation of an individual rather than an abstract norm. How can these come together? It's strained in a strangely complex way. While the church discourse absolutizes doctrine, others absolutize individual situations. But both sides are in fact setting out social norms for behavioral conformity. An ethics of equality does not require uniformity. There can be an ethic of equality which is an ethic of recognizing and respecting and celebrating difference. And I believe that a pluralist society can be creative in finding ways in which people of same-sex orientation have their rights and their loving and caring relationships recognized and cherished in a culture of difference. I'm not saying that gay and lesbian people are unloving. I'm not saying that their love is somehow deficient compared to others. But I'm talking about the uniqueness of the male and female relationship. Marriage matters. Reflect before you change it was the title of the statement of the Irish Bishops' Conference last week. Marriage matters. So the discussion on definition of marriage requires time. Yet in the current debate, normal parliamentary procedures seem to be rushed. And as a citizen, I would not like to see the instrument of referendum being used to fast-track positions of significance for the life of citizens and the common good. The fact that a number of referendums have been rejected in recent years is, in my opinion, an indication that the world of politics has not always allowed sufficient time for broad discussions of proposals. That's just my internal position, or my personal position. Serious matters of public debate need open and frank and balanced discussion. I've already quoted Pope Francis's comments at the opening of the Synod regarding how everybody should be able to say all that they feel they need to say, without polite deference, without hesitation, and at the same time all should listen with humility and welcome, with an open heart, to what others say. And he said that if there's no freedom to express all views, then you're not talking about a synod. That is not synodality, he said. You could add today that if in public debate people's contributions are simply brushed aside or are responded to just by sound bites prepared by professional spin doctors, then that is not the public debate which democracy requires. Pope Francis believes that truly honest and open discussion is positive. And this, as I said, seems to unnerve some people. Honest and open discussion can unnerve people in every situation, but we have to have the courage and the calm to foster that debate. I've consistently said that debate on this issue must be carried out respectfully, without the use of intemperate language. I would add that it must be carried out rationally and with respectable argument, and not simply with one-liners aimed at stopping debate. I do, however, feel obliged to say that I have in recent times received correspondence from people who support a no vote in the referendum, in which the language used is not just intemperate, but obnoxious, insulting, and unchristian in regard to gay and lesbian people. If people use such language to support a position they feel is Christian, then all I can say is that they have forgotten something essential about the Christian message. Marriage matters. Reflect before you change it. I've tried in these reflections to stress that the upcoming referendum touches on fundamental dimensions about what marriage and the family mean. I do so in the hope that my reflections will foster honest, mature, sensitive and respectful issues, and respectful reflection on issues that are important for Irish society and for the institution of marriage and the family, about which I feel strongly. I thank you.
Well, I said it wouldn't be dull, and it wasn't dull. I can also, having had a brief look back at the 2011 talk that Archbishop Martin gave before, it wasn't just the repeat, and rightly so, because very pertinent particular issues are in our minds at the moment. So I'm sure you all enjoyed that. We have some time now for some questions and answers. I'd like just to ask you to keep your questions directed to the talk, to the particular topic. There's lots of things you might want to ask the Bishop when he's here, but our talk is very much focused on a particular topic, a particular theme. So please keep your questions focused on that. I'd also ask you, please, I'm sure there's many who might want to ask a question and our time is quite limited, so it would be essential to keep your questions short, and we'll take them in groups of 3, I think, and give His Grace some time to gather his thoughts and get some ideas together for answering questions. So there will be a microphone going around. Ben has a microphone there. So if anyone would like to ask a question, would you please put your hand up?
Good evening, Your Grace. Finola Bruton is my name. In light of your reference to Pope Francis talking about having an open and frank discussion, what is your take on the statement we have in front of us here? We must reaffirm the right of children to grow up in a family with a father and a mother. Thank you.
Questions so far?
Do you maybe just stand up now?
Okay, we'll do our best anyway.
Bishop, when the divorce referendum happened, I voted yes because I felt it was a civil right to referendum to Caesar what Caesar. And I'm very conflicted as to whether I should do the same thing again.
Could you repeat the question, please? There's no...
Question
We
was
can't hear.
Yeah. Here's what we come to the answers in a minute. The question was about rendering to Caesar what is Caesar's, whether that particular principle applies in the case of the upcoming referendum. And the first question with regard to this particular statement here. So we have two questions, so I'll do one. There you go.
I wonder why we can't have a very plain and very simple discussion about same-sex marriage. We're to vote for same-sex marriage, yes or no. Now, it's not very clear from Archbishop's talk whether he agrees with same-sex marriage or not. Saying marriage matters reflect before you change it. I do not think that is good enough coming from our bishops and priests. We need a very clear statement from our bishops that same-sex marriage is going to change and discriminate against Catholics and Christians in this country, and that we will have no rights. Here in this country, every single person's right, the right of a child, the right of a father, the right of everybody, but we have no rights as far as Christians are concerned. And nobody is speaking clearly on this matter. And I would like to see that poster there in every single church in Ireland, because children need a father and a mother, and this needs to be clear. And I want to know why the bishop's speaking here and not in our churches.
Pope Francis' statement is a statement that he has repeated on many occasions. I have no difficulty with that statement. We live in a world in which not every child, unfortunately, can have that experience, and that children are actually being adequately looked after in particular circumstances in another way. But I come back to the fundamental thing I said there today. The real question is, what is the significance of being male and female? And when we address that, then you begin to realize that this has effect on nurturing, it has effect on what marriage means in many, many ways. What does it mean to be male and female? This is a fundamental, the male and female distinction is not simply a social construct. It is something that is inscribed in human activity, and that we have to affirm that, understand that, and then we come to see why it is that children need a mother and a father, why it is that we need male and female in our societies in different ways. With regard to Caesar, that there is no, in international law, there is no right to a marriage between same-sex people. Not everything that Caesar wants is necessarily good. Part of that render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God was an attack on Caesar. But Jesus was saying that when Caesar thinks he's God, then we move into a very, very, very dangerous situation. And so there is this challenge. We have to think of the way we want to see. Marriage is a natural institution. Marriage is a natural institution which the church, a Christian then, understands it to be that same natural institution to be elevated in a theological way, but it is fundamentally the same natural institution, and it is your responsibility to reflect and see what way are you going to help the society in which we live, and what way are you going to see that the Caesar, the civil society we live in, is the right one. The third question was about that if this passes, I very clearly said that, and when I say marriage is important, reflect before you change it. I'm appealing not to people who fully understand some of the things that you're saying, but what we have to try and get to do is to get the broader population in the country to take the time to reflect, not to be allowed to be rushed and pushed into something that is not for their good. I speak about marriage and the family. I spoke about marriage and the family last Sunday, the previous Sunday, in parishes where I am. I've given 3 talks on marriage and the family in the last few months. So it's unfair to say that the bishops are not speaking. I spoke with another bishop today. He's spoken, he told me, on 5 different occasions. Bishops are there, but bishops in a pluralistic society must also address people who may not agree with them, and try and get them to reflect on what's involved, and to build up a greater consensus about these matters.
Thank you for your answers. So now let's get some more questions.
We're not getting good orthodox teaching in the church. It's all watered down. And I have 2 questions. When are the clergy going to teach the definition of marriage and talk about chastity and sodomy in their sermons? In the scriptures we've had recently, it was all about Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's exactly what this referendum is about. And the second question, are you as Archbishop going to direct your clergy to be a wise voice and teach God's law?
Directly ask the Archbishop, please, in relation to the statement here from the Holy Father. Do you think the Church are going all out 100% to try and convince people about the Christian message? In so far as he welcomes the idea of open debate, but a lot of people doubt whether there will be open, because the media here are all one-sided in so many ways. They're so anti-church. We had an example there where the pro-life had to have a public meeting to express their discontent with the bias in the media, and it seems very much as if the same bias will carry through into this referendum.
You're asking about the quality of the debate. I'm going to move people on now, because I want to have a chance. Okay? Sorry, next question. Please. Thank you.
Could I just say, somewhat on the same theme, it seems to me that the image of a field hospital is all very fine, but what about the battle? There is a battle out there, and the question I want to put to His Grace is, I think part of the battle is to get through all the noise a strong image of what marriage really is. And to me, in nearly 50 years of marriage, I came to the view that the Christian family is an image of the Holy Trinity in a way that man is made in the image of God. And that our life reflects, married life reflects in a particular way the love of God within Himself. And that's what gives our marriages reality. And that polarity actually is not just in human society, it goes throughout nature. We see it in things as basic as electricity. The question is, does His Grace think it's a helpful thing to do to affirm that the Christian family is an icon of the Trinity.
Our priests teaching the teaching of the church, am I encouraging priests to teach the teaching of the church? I am. I'm constantly doing it.
Father Martin
Is it being done adequately? I agree. Let me answer my other question and pose it. What is going on in this process of the synod? We are going through an ongoing renewal of the teaching of marriage. I've constantly spoken to priests again about the need to stress in their preaching marriage is an itinerary of faith. It's a way of living out their faith. I spoke last week about marriage as a way to sanctity and holiness, and these are ways in which we have to encourage and give hope. I'm a believer that I believe that you do far more if you attract people to the Christian teaching than if you throw books of dogma at them. I think you have to find a way in which you can, and this is where people who live family life come into place. How do we get across to young people in the confusion of our world that marriage is something worthwhile, that marriage, the meaning of marriage is something that is enriching? If they don't see it, they don't see that, not led by me. I can't witness marriage and the family life because I'm not married. But the sacrament of marriage is not, as I say, a blessing for a couple. The sacrament of marriage is a mission that's given to married people to live out within the church and for them to witness to that. And we need more. We have very few movements of married people who go out and teach that also through experience. I believe that married people must take the lead, but I believe that the leadership in the church, haven't been giving that encouragement. If I were to go into a parish and say, what are the resources you have now in this current discussion about marriage and the family? I might be told we've got a pro-life group, or we have a family life group. Rarely will somebody say, we have married people who are married. People who are committed by the very virtue of their sacrament to be out there showing and convincing people what marriage, what it's about. And you win many more people if you do in that. But you must also know what marriage is really about. It's about love. And you can only attract people to the understanding of marriage when you give them a realistic and a demanding understanding of love. And you do that, I believe, far more by preaching that message and by witnessing to that message than simply by condemning. The quality of the debate, it's early yet. Okay, one finds bias in the media, but the media will and in some cases are trying to give a balanced, to fulfill their obligations, their civil obligations. If you've got cases where that doesn't happen, there are structures to which you can go and have that remedied. But one of the difficulties is we need more people who can go out and speak. We need more people who can go and stand before a microphone and talk rationally and try and bring as many people, particularly the undecided, particularly those who are questioning. We need people who can go out and rationally help them to do this. And I can say that in general, I've rarely been mistreated by the media. People mightn't agree with what I say, and this I can say there are many in the Catholic media who might disagree with some things that I say. But we have to have this mature debate, and that's why I say that was the reason this marriage matters. Reflect before you change it. That, I think, is the message we should be getting across, right across, particularly those people who are confused and might be rushed into changing it. We have to say, let's have a mature debate. Let's have a mature debate in a society in which not everybody is on our side. It is a secular society, but we as Christians have got our place to play in that as well. Is the human family a reflection of the Blessed Trinity? Yes. And again, that comes down to our theological understanding of what love is. See, we have at times even got a false understanding of God. We have a very Unitarian rather than a Trinitarian understanding of God. We don't understand the deeper meaning of what the Trinity as relationship means. But our God is not a closed God. Our God is a God who by nature communicates and reaches out. And therefore we have to reflect that. And therefore every family, every Christian family should by its nature not be a closed God, a closed family. Every family must, in the way the Trinity is there, rushes out in a process of love to embrace and to save and to bring people.
Yeah, we're coming to the end of time, I'm afraid. I'm going to take the privilege of asking that last question myself. Maybe you would like to ask more questions, but we're finishing at 9. Right, so let's ask about conscience clause. If the referendum is carried, or even if it isn't carried, there is a real concern in Ireland and elsewhere about people, their religious freedom, their freedom of speech, people working as photographers, bakers who are very closely associated with weddings and so on, and even more generally. Let's comment on that and what can we say, what can be done to try and address that?
I think freedom of conscience is probably one of the most fundamental of all human rights, because it touches the very depths of a person in their identity. And we have to redevelop a sensitivity to what that means. We look at, for example, totalitarian regimes and the difficulties that people had to express their freedom of conscience and the courage that many had to do that. And in many ways, even in the really repressive regimes, there were some people of courage who could actually, and were not afraid to raise their voices. And they're the ones who will be remembered. They're the ones who will have changed society. And here we have, in this I agree, there is, not just in the media, but in political culture, a culture of sound bites, a culture of quick answers, one-liners, which doesn't foster this idea of people being able to reflect, express, and develop their conscience. We have problems. We've seen it in and the inconsistency. For example, somebody said religious solemnizers won't be forced to celebrate gay marriages. Now, what is that saying? It's saying, okay, there is a conscientious question, and we respect the conscience of religious solemnizers, namely priests. What about a Christian in civil society, a lay Christian, who has the same difficulties? Does he have freedom of conscience? Or is his freedom of conscience different to me and mine as a priest? I don't believe that. Now people will say, okay, if you're paid by the state, you do what the state tells you. That isn't, in the long term, that isn't what even democracy is about. So I do believe we have to stress that. It has the other side, that we have to respect the freedom of expression of others who may disagree with us. But I think that this question of freedom of conscience is being pushed aside in debate, and we're getting very superficial answers about the way it's being addressed in our society. And I believe that's a much more serious problem. I believe that there's I've been noticing more and more in my travels and my reflections a real dissatisfaction, uncertainty about politics. People are losing confidence in the political process, and it's because that politicians, political parties are becoming more and more insensitive to the way people are thinking. and that they're not carrying out this process of mediation between the needs of the community and the views and the desires of citizens. When we move into that type of politics, I believe that society is being damaged. And I believe that respect for conscience is a way in which politics shows its respect for the citizens who build up that. And I believe that in the area of freedom of conscience, freedom of religious expression is also one of the most fundamental rights that have to be observed.
I know there are many of you who want to ask more questions, but time is up. One of the things that this shows, I think, that is worth thinking about.
Why?
Because we're finishing at 9 o'clock. So, excuse me. Sorry, if you wish to try to encourage debate in the church, you're not going to do so if priests or bishops are going to be badgered. That's my point. I do agree that we need to have more chances to discuss things like tonight. I think you're absolutely right, and there's loads of questions, of course there are. And so that's why you need to get talking to your priests and talking to your bishops and trying to encourage more things like this happening. But when they do happen, they have to happen in a way that's going to encourage debate. And that's quite a challenge, I think. I'd like to thank you for your attention tonight, for coming along, for listening so well, for keeping our questions short. We managed to get in a fair few of them there, all right. As I said, it's not going to be dull. It's a very, very important topic. There's no way that everyone's questions can ever be fully answered in a limited time like this, but I hope at least it's given you something to talk about, to think about, to get talking amongst yourselves, to write in. For example, if you're worried about the media, write in, complain. If you're worried about your priest not talking about marriage, speak to them, encourage them, let them know that you'd like to hear. You know, there are things that ordinary people like us can do. We in the Iona Institute are very, very happy with all the support that we get from people coming to talks and so on. We're trying to do our bit to try and encourage and contribute to debate in Ireland. And we know there's bias, we know it's very, very hard, but we have to keep trying.
John,
so, thank you very much.
How can we encourage the priests when the Archbishop has written to them to tell them not to get involved?
Well, I would suggest you would do it by trying to focus on our topic tonight, the teaching of the church.
What is the teaching of the church on this item? Okay. What is the church saying? Do we vote yes? Do we vote no? I've never heard that come from the church.
Well, the bishops have said very clearly.
Yes or no? As Catholics.
Have you read the bishop's statement?
Yes.
What did it say? What did it say?
Think before you vote.
It said we cannot support what? Pardon? It's what did the bishop's statement say? It said we cannot support this amendment. Let's be very clear. You know, I don't mind being badgered. I've grown up in a family and in a world in which I can fight my corner. I'm a street fighter. But I will not. I don't like people who say the bishops have said nothing. We have. I have not forbidden people, the priests, to talk about marriage and the family. But what I'm trying to do this evening is to say to you, get out there. The church is not. I find it very strange that people will say, "We're the church, the bishops aren't," and then when it comes, everybody says, "Well, until the bishops say something, where are we going to go?" The bishops are teaching the teaching of the church to responsible Christians who are called to live out their reality, following their own conscience, and that doesn't mean that you just do what you like. But let's work to build up confidence in marriage and the family. That's what we owe our young people most of all, that they can be led into an understanding of what it means to be married, what it means to be in love with and what it means to be a parent, and what it means to be a parent in a society, and how we can, I use this phrase intergenerational, because I believe this is extremely important. Our genetic makeup is an intergenerational one. That's why genetic parentage is so important. But I'm now doing what I shouldn't be doing. That's not respecting the words of the chair. And if that happened in Dáil Éireann, I would have been thrown out of the room. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming and supporting and coming out to this talk, and hope to see you at the next Iona talk. Thank you very, very much.